The rain started falling the moment Detective Linda Rodriguez crossed the town line into Haven Falls, as if the weather itself was warning her to turn back. She'd been driving for 6 hours straight from Portland, her back aching from the uncomfortable police cruiser seat, following up on a missing persons case that had haunted her for 3 months. Rebecca Martinez, 28 years old, marketing executive, responsible daughter, who called her mother every Sunday without fail. She'd vanished during what should have been a simple weekend camping trip in the Oregon wilderness, leaving behind only questions and a family desperate for answers. Her last known location was a gas station receipt from Haven Falls, time-stamped at 3:47 p.m. on July 15th. After that, nothing. No credit card activity, no cell phone pings, no trace of her or her silver Honda Civic. It was as if she'd simply ceased to exist. Linda had worked missing persons for 12 years, and she'd learned to trust her instincts. Something about this case felt wrong from the very beginning. Rebecca was methodical, the type who left detailed itineraries and checked in religiously. She wouldn't just disappear without a word. The town appeared through the rain like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. Victorian houses lined tree-shaded streets, their wraparound porches decorated with hanging baskets of flowers that seemed impossibly vibrant despite the gray October weather. Children's bicycles leaned against white picket fences, and American flags hung limp in the still air. A hand-painted sign welcomed visitors. Haven Falls, population 2 to 341, where every day is a gift. Linda parked outside the sheriff's station, a small brick building that looked like it had been built in the 1940s and lovingly maintained ever since. The brass nameplate on the door was polished to a mirror shine, and someone had planted marigolds in neat rows along the front walkway. Sheriff Thomas Hendricks was waiting for her inside, as if he'd been expecting her arrival. He was a tall man in his 50s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of deep tan that came from spending most of his time outdoors. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine, but something in his pale blue eyes made Linda's skin crawl. "Detective Rodriguez, welcome to Haven Falls. I have to say, I'm surprised Portland sent someone all the way out here for a case this old, usually after 3 months." He let the sentence hang in the air. "Rebecca Martinez had family who won't let this go," Linda replied, settling into the chair across from his immaculate desk. "They hired a private investigator who believes she made it to your town. I'm here to follow up on that lead and hopefully bring some closure to her family." Of course. Let me pull what little we have." Hendricks opened a filing cabinet with practiced ease and withdrew a thin folder that looked suspiciously empty. To be honest, Detective, we don't get many missing person cases here. Haven Falls is the kind of place where everybody knows everybody. If someone was in trouble, we'd know about it within hours. Linda opened her own thick file and pulled out Rebecca's photograph, a professional headshot that showed a young woman with warm brown eyes and an easy smile. Do you recognize her? She would have been driving a silver Honda Civic license plate number. Linda rattled off the details she'd memorized. Hendrik studied the photo for a long moment, his weathered fingers tracing the edges. Can't say I do, but that doesn't mean she wasn't here. We get our fair share of tourists, especially in summer. Folks love our hiking trails and the waterfall we're named after. Maybe she stopped for gas or grabbed lunch at Martha's Diner and moved on. Happens all the time. Her credit card was used at Murphy's gas station on Main Street at 3:47 p.m. on July 15th. That's the last financial activity we have on record. Murphy's, sure. Old Pete Murphy runs that place. Been there for 30 years. Mind if I ask what brings someone all the way from the city to our little corner of the world for camping? Linda made a note of the deflection. That's what I'm trying to find out. Mind if I take a look around town, ask a few questions? Not at all. Haven Falls is a friendly place, Detective. I'm sure folks will be happy to help however they can. Just remember, this is a small community. People here value their privacy, and they don't take kindly to outsiders stirring up trouble. Linda spent the next 3 hours methodically canvassing the town. She visited Murphy's gas station, where the elderly owner claimed to have no memory of Rebecca despite the receipt bearing his station's identification number. She checked Martha's Diner, where the waitresses were all smiles and empty shrugs. The small grocery store, the post office, the visitors center with its cheerful displays of local hiking maps. Everywhere she went, people were polite, helpful, and claimed to have never seen Rebecca Martinez. But Linda had conducted hundreds of interviews over her career, and she'd developed a sixth sense for deception. It wasn't that the residents of Haven Falls were actively lying. It was more subtle than that. Their responses were too similar, their body language too controlled, their smiles too practiced. It felt like they were all reading from the same script. And then there was the way they looked at her when they thought she wasn't paying attention. Not hostile exactly, but measuring, like they were sizing her up for something specific. The town itself was almost too perfect. The streets were clean, the buildings well maintained, the gardens immaculate. But perfection in a small town was often a mask for something darker underneath. Linda had seen it before. communities that presented a flawless facade to hide corruption, abuse, or worse. As afternoon turned to evening and the shadows grew longer, Linda decided to check into the town's only hotel, a charming bed and breakfast called the Maple Leaf Inn. The building was a restored Victorian mansion with gingerbread trim and stained glass windows that caught the fading light like jewels. The proprietor, a middle-aged Asian woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, introduced herself as Mrs. Chen and showed Linda to a room on the second floor with a view of the town square. The room was decorated with antiques and smelled of lavender and old wood. "You're here about that missing girl, aren't you?" Mrs. Chen asked casually as she set fresh towels on the antique dresser. Linda tried to hide her surprise at the direct question. In her experience, small-town gossip traveled fast. But this felt different. "What makes you say that?" "Word travels fast in a place like this, Detective. Sheriff Hendricks mentioned you were asking questions about someone who might have passed through. Such a shame when someone goes missing, especially a young person with their whole life ahead of them. I do hope you find what you're looking for." "Did you see her? Rebecca Martinez?" Linda showed the photograph again. Mrs. Chen paused, her hand still holding a towel. For just a moment, her carefully composed expression flickered, and Linda saw something underneath. Fear, maybe, or guilt, or something else entirely. "I'm sorry, Detective, but I don't recall seeing her. We get so many visitors during the summer months, especially young people interested in hiking and camping. They all start to blur together after a while." She finished arranging the towels with unnecessary precision. "Would you like me to bring you some tea? The evenings can get quite chilly here in the mountains." After Mrs. Chen left, Linda sat on the antique bed and reviewed her notes. Every single person she'd interviewed had given essentially the same response. Polite regret, no memory of Rebecca, helpful suggestions that she might have passed through without stopping. It was too clean, too coordinated, too perfect. She decided to take a walk through town before dark, hoping to spot something she'd missed during her official interviews. The streets were quiet now, most of the shops closed for the day, their windows dark and empty. But as she passed the town square, she noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. The memorial statue in the center wasn't dedicated to Civil War soldiers or founding fathers like most small-town monuments. Instead, it was a simple granite obelisk, about 8 feet tall, with names carved into its polished surface. Lots of names. Linda counted at least 40, spanning what looked like several decades based on the varying styles of carving and degrees of weathering. The inscription at the base read, "In memory of those who found peace in Haven Falls. That was strange phrasing for a memorial. Linda had seen hundreds of similar monuments, and they usually honored those who had served, sacrificed, or died for something. But found peace suggested something different, something more personal and final. She took out her phone to photograph the memorial, focusing on the names and dates. Some of the more recent entries caught her attention. Jennifer Walsh, 2019. David Park, 2020. Maria Santos, 2021. Robert Chen, 2022. The dates continued right up to the present year. Linda tried to run a quick internet search on some of the names, but discovered she had no cell phone signal. That was odd. Her phone had shown full bars when she'd first arrived in town. Beautiful memorial, isn't it, Detective? Linda spun around to find Sheriff Hendricks approaching from across the square. In the fading twilight, his friendly demeanor seemed somehow more sinister, his pale eyes reflecting the streetlights like an animal's. Marcus Chen had always prided himself on being a rational man. As a freelance journalist specializing in debunking urban legends, he'd spent the better part of 5 years exposing hoaxes and explaining away the supposedly supernatural. So when he received an anonymous email about the strange happenings in Copperfield, Tennessee, he packed his laptop and digital recorder with the same skeptical confidence he brought to every assignment. The email had been vague but intriguing. Every October, people disappear from surrounding towns. They all had one thing in common. They were last seen driving toward Copperfield during their harvest festival. The locals won't talk about it. Something's wrong here. Copperfield sat nestled in a valley between rolling hills, population 1,247, according to the faded welcome sign. Marcus arrived on October 30th, just in time for their annual harvest festival. The town square buzzed with activity, families setting up booths, children running between the preparation crews, and the sweet smell of apple cider and caramel corn filling the crisp autumn air. It looked perfectly normal, disappointingly normal. Marcus parked in front of the Copper Kettle Diner and checked into the only motel in town, a modest place called the Hillside Inn. The desk clerk, an elderly woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, smiled warmly as she handed him his key. "You're here for the festival, I suppose?" she asked. "We don't get many visitors this time of year, except for the festival, of course. Actually, I'm a journalist. I'm writing a piece about small-town traditions. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" Her smile faltered slightly. What kind of questions? Just about the festival's history, how long you've been celebrating it, that sort of thing. Oh, we've always celebrated the harvest, she said quickly, turning back to her paperwork. Since the town was founded in 1847, never missed a year. Marcus sensed there was more to the story, but the woman had clearly closed off. He thanked her and headed to his room to prepare for the evening's festivities. The festival officially began at sunset. Marcus wandered through the decorated square, interviewing locals and taking photos. Everyone was friendly but evasive when he asked about the festival's origins or any unusual incidents. Their answers felt rehearsed, as if they'd been coached on what to say to outsiders. The highlight of the evening was supposed to be the selection of the Harvest King, a tradition where they crowned someone to preside over the festival. Marcus expected it to be a cute ceremony involving a local child or teenager, but as the crowd gathered around the makeshift stage, he noticed something odd. The potential kings were all adults, all strangers to the town, and all looked vaguely uncomfortable, as if they weren't quite sure how they'd ended up on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Mayor Bradley, a portly man with a politician's smile, "it's time to select this year's Harvest King. As tradition dictates, we'll choose from our honored visitors." Marcus realized with growing unease that he was one of only 6 people on the stage. The others included a young couple who looked like they might be college students, a middle-aged businessman in a rumpled suit, and a woman about Marcus's age wearing hiking gear. "How did we get chosen?" whispered the businessman. "I don't know," Marcus replied. "I was just watching, and suddenly everyone was guiding me up here." The crowd below began to chant something in unison, but Marcus couldn't make out the words. The sound was rhythmic and hypnotic, growing louder with each repetition. Paper lanterns strung around the square flickered in a synchronized pattern, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in seconds. Mayor Bradley approached with an ornate wooden box. "The Harvest King will be chosen by sacred lot, as it has been for 106 years. Marcus tried to step backward, but found his legs wouldn't respond to his commands. The other candidates seemed similarly frozen, their eyes wide with panic. The businessman's mouth was moving, but no sound came out. "Each visitor will draw a token," the mayor continued, his voice taking on an otherworldly resonance. "The one who draws the corn husk will have the honor of ensuring our town's prosperity for another year." The crowd's chanting grew more intense, and Marcus could finally make out the words, "Feed the soil, feed the earth, death brings life, death brings birth." The young woman in hiking gear was chosen first. She drew a smooth river stone. Relief flooded her face, but it was short-lived. As soon as she stepped back, her feet sank into the wooden stage as if it were quicksand. She looked down in horror as the boards seemed to liquefy around her ankles. "What's happening?" she screamed, but her voice sounded distant, muffled. The college couple drew next. Both pulled out carved wooden acorns. They too began sinking into the stage, their terrified faces disappearing gradually as the wood consumed them. The crowd's chanting never faltered, never paused to acknowledge the horror unfolding on stage. The businessman's hands shook as he reached into the box. He drew a wheat stalk and immediately began sinking faster than the others, as if the stage were hungrier for him. His final scream was cut short as the wood closed over his head. Only Marcus and one other person remained. A teenage girl who couldn't have been more than 16. She was crying silently, mascara streaming down her cheeks. The box now contained only 2 tokens. "I don't understand what's happening," she whispered to Marcus. "Neither do I," he replied, though a terrible understanding was beginning to dawn. The anonymous email, the evasive answers, the fact that everyone chosen was a visitor to town. This wasn't a harvest festival. It was a harvest. The girl reached into the box with a trembling hand and pulled out a painted pumpkin. She looked at it in confusion, then at Marcus, then back at the token. Nothing happened. She wasn't sinking, which meant Marcus knew what he would find in the box before he even looked. The corn husk was ancient and brittle, tied with a red ribbon that looked suspiciously like dried blood. As soon as his fingers touched it, Marcus felt a jolt of electricity run through his body. The crowd's chanting reached a crescendo, and the paper lanterns began to swing wildly despite the absence of any wind. "Our harvest king," Mayor Bradley announced, his voice booming across the square. "May his sacrifice bring us prosperity." The stage beneath Marcus's feet didn't turn to quicksand like it had for the others. Instead, the wooden boards began to sprout. Tiny green shoots pushing up between the planks, growing with impossible speed. Vines wrapped around his ankles, then his legs, then his waist. They were surprisingly strong and warm, and they pulsed with a heartbeat that wasn't his own. Marcus tried to use his digital recorder, thinking that if he was going to die, at least he could leave evidence. But the device crumbled to dust in his hands, as did his camera and phone. The town wasn't just claiming his life, it was erasing any trace that he'd ever been there. "Please," he gasped as the vines reached his chest. "I don't understand. Why are you doing this?" Mayor Bradley's face had changed. The friendly politician's mask had slipped away, revealing something ancient and hungry underneath. Every town has its needs, Mr. Chen. Every community requires sacrifice to survive. We've learned to take what we need from those who won't be missed. People will look for me. I have editors, contacts. No, the mayor said sadly. You drove here alone. You paid cash for your room. Your phone has no signal here, and hasn't since you crossed the town line. As far as the outside world is concerned, you never made it to Copperfield. The vines were at his throat now, but they weren't choking him. Instead, they seemed to be connecting with him, becoming part of him. Marcus could feel his consciousness expanding, merging with something vast and patient and impossibly hungry. He could sense the roots beneath the town, spreading for miles in every direction, connecting every building, every resident, every square inch of Copperfield in a vast, living network. He could feel the memories of previous Harvest Kings, decades of visitors who had drawn the corn husk, who had fed the town with their lives and their essence. They were all still there in a way, part of the collective consciousness that kept Copperfield alive and thriving while other small towns withered and died. As his individual self began to dissolve, Marcus understood the terrible truth. Copperfield wasn't just sustained by human sacrifice, it was built on it. The town itself was alive, a single organism masquerading as a community. The residents weren't entirely human anymore. They were extensions of the town's will, puppet appendages of something that had been growing in this valley for over a century. And now Marcus was becoming part of it too. His last coherent thought as Marcus Chen was a bitter irony. He'd spent years debunking supernatural stories, only to become one himself. But even that thought faded as he merged with the collective, his memories and knowledge absorbed into the town's vast repository of stolen lives. The festival continued until dawn, with the remaining visitor, the teenage girl, released with carefully implanted memories of a wonderful evening and a strong desire to tell her friends about the charming little town she'd discovered. She would spread the word, consciously or unconsciously, drawing more visitors to next year's festival. By morning, the stage was just a stage again, and there was no sign that Marcus Chen had ever existed. His rental car had vanished, his motel room showed no evidence of occupancy, and his name disappeared from reservation records as if it had never been there. The only trace left was a single corn stalk that had sprouted overnight in the town square, taller and stronger than any corn had a right to be in October. Mayor Bradley looked at it with satisfaction as he sipped his morning coffee. Good harvest this year, he murmured to himself. And deep beneath the town, in the vast network of roots and consciousness, that was Copperfield's true heart. Marcus Chen's absorbed knowledge whispered agreement. After all, every town needs to eat. The GPS died first. Sarah Matthews gripped the steering wheel tighter as her phone screen flickered and went black, leaving her stranded on a narrow country road with nothing but darkness pressing against her windshield. The headlights carved a weak path through the October mist, illuminating cracked asphalt and the skeletal remains of corn stalks on either side. She'd been driving for 3 hours, trying to reach her sister's house in Cedar Falls, when she took what she thought was a shortcut. Now, with her phone dead and the fuel gauge hovering dangerously close to empty, that decision felt like the worst mistake of her life. A weathered sign emerged from the fog. "Welcome to Millbrook, population 847. The number had been crossed out in red paint, replaced with a jagged 0 that looked like it had been carved with fingernails. Sarah's stomach clenched, but she had no choice. The fuel light had been blinking for the last 10 miles, and she could see the faint glow of street lights ahead. At least there would be people. At least she could ask for directions. The main street of Millbrook stretched before her like a scene from a forgotten photograph. Victorian houses lined both sides, their gingerbread trim rotting and peeling. Streetlights flickered intermittently, casting erratic shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Every window was dark except for one, a pale, sickly yellow light emanating from the second floor of a house near the end of the street. Sarah pulled into the parking lot of what had once been Murphy's General Store, according to the faded sign swaying in the wind. The building looked like it had been abandoned for decades, its windows boarded up and covered in graffiti that seemed to writhe in the shifting light. She killed the engine and sat in the sudden silence, her heart pounding. The fog had grown thicker, pressing against the windows like curious fingers. She could barely see the street now, but that single yellow light still glowed in the distance, steady and unwavering. Her phone remained dead despite multiple attempts to restart it. She had 2 choices: stay in the car until morning and hope someone would find her, or walk to that house and ask for help. The thought of spending the night alone in this dead town made her skin crawl, but the alternative seemed worse. Sarah grabbed her purse and stepped out into the fog. The air was thick and cold, carrying the smell of decay and something else, something sweet and cloying that made her gag. Her footsteps echoed unnaturally in the silence, each sound seeming to come from multiple directions at once. The street lights flickered more frantically as she passed beneath them, as if her presence was somehow disturbing their rhythm. She walked past house after house, all of them dark and silent. Some had front doors standing wide open, revealing nothing but impenetrable blackness within. Others had windows that reflected her image back at her, but the reflections seemed wrong somehow, lagging a split second behind her movements or showing her from angles that didn't match her position. The yellow light grew brighter as she approached, and she could see now that it came from a Victorian house that was in slightly better condition than the others. The porch light was on, and there was a car in the driveway, a rusty pickup truck that looked like it might actually run. Sarah climbed the porch steps, the wood groaning under her weight. She raised her hand to knock, then froze. The front door was ajar, and she could hear something from inside. A low, rhythmic sound like breathing, but too slow and too deep to be human. "Hello?" she called out, her voice cracking. "Is anyone home? I need help." The breathing stopped. Sarah waited, her hand poised to knock, but the silence stretched on. Just as she was about to call out again, a voice drifted from inside the house. "Come in, Sarah. We've been waiting for you." Her blood turned to ice. The voice was familiar, impossibly familiar. It sounded exactly like her sister Kate, but Kate was 300 miles away in Cedar Falls. Kate had no way of knowing she was here, no way of knowing she was lost. "Kate?" Sarah whispered. "Come in, Sarah. Come home." Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Sarah pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was warm and filled with the scent of baking bread and coffee, such a stark contrast to the decay outside that it made her dizzy. The living room was cozy and well lit, with a fire crackling in the fireplace and family photos covering every surface. But the photos were wrong. They showed Sarah and Kate as children, but in places Sarah had never been, with people she didn't recognize. In one, they were standing in front of this very house, smiling and waving. In another, they were sitting at a dinner table with a family of strangers, all of them laughing at some unheard joke. "You made it," Kate's voice said from the kitchen. I was starting to worry. Sarah followed the voice, her legs moving without her permission. The kitchen was exactly like Kate's kitchen back home, down to the chipped mug on the counter and the grocery list held to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. Kate stood at the stove with her back turned, stirring something in a pot. She looked exactly right. Same brown hair, same blue sweater, same way of shifting her weight from foot to foot when she was concentrating. "Kate, what are you doing here?" Sarah asked. "How did you know I was coming?" Kate turned around, and Sarah's scream died in her throat. It was Kate's face, but her eyes were completely black, and when she smiled, her teeth were too sharp and too numerous. "I've always been here, Sarah," We all have. Millbrook takes care of its own. The thing that looked like Kate moved closer, and Sarah stumbled backward. You're not Kate. What are you? I'm exactly who I need to be. The creature's voice was shifting now, becoming deeper, more resonant. Just like everyone else in town, we become what visitors need us to be, what will make them comfortable, what will make them stay. Sarah turned to run, but the kitchen door slammed shut. The windows were gone, replaced by solid walls covered in those same family photos. But now the photos were moving, the figures in them turning to look at her with the same black eyes. Millbrook was dying. The Kate thing continued conversationally, still stirring the pot. All the young people left for the cities. The old folks died off. We were becoming a ghost town, and ghost towns don't get visitors, don't get new blood. Let me go, Sarah whispered. But then something wonderful happened. The town started fighting back, started adapting, started learning how to be what people needed. The creature's face was melting now, reforming into something that might have been Sarah's mother, then her college roommate, then her first boyfriend. We studied every car that passed through, learned from every phone that got signal. Facebook profiles, Instagram photos, text messages. We absorbed it all. The pot on the stove began to overflow, but what spilled out wasn't soup. It was a thick, black substance that moved like it was alive, creeping across the floor toward Sarah's feet. Population 847, the creature said, its face now a horrible amalgamation of everyone Sarah had ever known. That's how many people have stopped to visit over the years. They're all still here, in a way, part of the town now, part of us. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, but she could feel it giving way behind her, becoming soft and yielding like flesh. The black substance reached her shoes and began to climb, cold and sticky against her ankles. Don't fight it, the creature said gently. It's easier if you don't fight it. Millbrook will take good care of you. You'll be anyone you need to be. For the next visitor, you might be their spouse, their parent, their best friend. You'll be perfect. The darkness was up to her knees now, and Sarah could feel it seeping into her skin, into her bone. Her vision was starting to blur, but she could still see the photos on the walls. They were all the same now. Endless pictures of herself and Kate, herself and her parents, herself and people she'd never met but somehow knew intimately. The light, she gasped. The light in the window. It was bait. The last light in Millbrook, the creature agreed. always burning, always waiting, a beacon for the lost and the lonely. We've gotten so good at being what people need that we sometimes forget what we used to be. Sarah's strength was failing, but she managed one last question. What happens to the real people? The ones you replace? The creature's face shifted one final time, becoming a perfect mirror of Sarah's own. They become part of the collection, part of the memory, part of the performance. As the darkness closed over her head, Sarah's last coherent thought was of her sister Kate, 300 miles away in Cedar Falls, probably wondering why she hadn't called to say she'd arrived safely. Kate would wait. She'd call the police eventually. Maybe they'd even find Sarah's car in the morning. But they'd never find Sarah. The next morning, Millbrook looked exactly as it had for decades. Empty houses lined the main street, their windows dark and their doors locked. The general store remained boarded up, and the street lights flickered in their broken rhythm. The only sign of life was a single yellow light glowing steadily in the window of a Victorian house near the end of the street. And if you looked carefully, you might see a figure moving behind the glass, a young woman with brown hair and a kind face, waiting patiently for the next lost soul to find their way home. After all, Millbrook takes care of its own.